there are a lot of Christian people who don't feel like there's anything to learn from anything outside of the Christian space. And frankly, I think there's a lot we can learn from anyone. And it's pretentious to think we have the monopoly on valuable information. Well, welcome to another edition of Resisting Pretense. We're having honest conversations about a life of faith in modern culture. And our hope is that at the end, we'll sharpen your thinking and inspire faith-infused conversations in your own life.
Easy for you to say.
No, I had to read it.
And you still got it
I still got it wrong. That's right. That's right. Today's topic. Hold on. Need coffee first.
While he's drinking his coffee, we do want to remind you that we are unofficially sponsored by Diet Coke.
Yep. And
so if you hear a ksh in the middle of this, you know that we've just opened our cans.
That's right, because it was an extra cup of coffee morning, and so we still have yet to open the Diet Cokes, but the coffee is like 2 or 3 times the caffeine, so I'm sticking with coffee for now.
It's kind of strange that, we're in Yuma, Arizona, where it's 115 in the summer, but today it's actually windy and a little bit cold, and so coffee just seemed more appropriate to start the podcast. By the end, I'm sure we'll be into the Diet Coke.
I was super happy with the wind and the cold, though. My son told me something interesting I did not realize. He said, guess what the highest temperature was this summer? Can you guess?
In Yuma?
In Yuma.
I would guess 121.
That is frequent. Some people aren't going to believe this to be true. That is frequently around what our high temperatures are. This summer, the highest temperature we had was 114. Isn't that weird?
But when it's 114 with 80% humidity, it feels like it's 121 at midnight.
That's right. When you open the door at night and it's dark and you get this like oven blast of air. People, we're not meant to live here. All right. So our conversation today, or our topic today, is that conversation sucks.
Okay. So we're going to have a conversation about something that sucks.
That's right. Thank you for joining in. I think we were laughing about this earlier because it doesn't always suck, but more and more it feels like conversations can suck, partly because people are afraid of confrontation.
It's honestly oftentimes the reason that I struggle with this. I mean, I'm kind of the one who said to you, hey, conversation sucks, because getting into a conversation or getting into a deep level of conversation requires a certain amount of trust and grace. And I think I've been tainted maybe a little bit by the world's media to say every conversation you're going to have is going to be confrontational. And I don't like confrontation, number one, to begin with, but I especially don't want to walk into a situation where that possibly could be the outcome without going through at least hey, let's have a discussion about this.
Yeah, it's like you're always on the precipice of walking on eggshells.
Absolutely.
Like there's or maybe even a better analogy is it just feels like you're always walking through a minefield. And you never know what conversation you're going to start that is going to blow up in your face, and you're going to all of a sudden be knee deep in somebody's emotional baggage or your own emotional baggage or just in not what you expected in the conversation. So,
well, and I think so many times it feels like that it's not just, hey, there's a line drawn in the sand. We can talk about what's on the other side of the line, but it's almost like there's this wall built that you can't even have that conversation because one or both of you are so dogmatic about your side of it,
right,
that you're not even willing to explore what the other side has to say,
Yeah, it's like our culture has lost or is not lost, but that's probably an overstatement, but is losing its taste for dialogue and debate and discussion. That can all be really healthy things, um, but it doesn't feel like that's valued that much anymore. And I think some of it in an extreme, because I don't hear this a lot, but I hear it occasionally, when your words can be considered as violence. Like, I don't want to be thought of as violent. I don't want
No.
to be thought of as the jerk that like is pushy or dogma, enforcing. And so it puts me in this position of not wanting to come off that way, but also not wanting to give into that mentality that words are violence. I mean, especially when it's just disagreement or
Right.
debate or discussion. That's not violence towards you. That's a let's exchange ideas and let's listen to each other and poke holes in each other's arguments and show each other maybe something a bigger picture that neither of us saw in the first place.
Well, and I don't want, on the one side, I don't want to be thought of as violent,
Mm-hmm.
but I also on the other side don't want to feel the strong emotion
Mm-hmm.
that comes across that sometimes can give you that violence, that aggressive, assertive feeling like, you know,
Where
I'm
you
right, you're wrong, there's the door.
Yeah, where you went from thinking you were having a conversation or discussion to now it's an argument.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So you you expressed a kind of a frustration, and you started it with this phrase that kind of caught my attention. Like you're like, if I were to be honest, I'm like, well, why wouldn't you be honest? But it highlighted something you mentioned it earlier: trust.
Mhm.
Like, trust is an essential part of conversation. It doesn't mean I have to trust you implicitly, but I have to trust that you're going to be reasonable, that you're going to engage in a debate without attacking me or my character, or, whatever, that you're going to keep this conversation in the space of ideas. There's a lot of trust that I honestly hadn't thought about how much that goes into just everyday conversation.
Well, and respect,
Mm-hmm.
that we are both created in God's image. But our God is so creative that he creates us wired differently for
Mm-hmm.
maybe even one of the very real purposes of having a conversation, talking about what the different sides are and being able to say, I can disagree with your opinion or your thought, but I like you. You're a good person. I just don't agree with where you stand on things. Um,
You ever thought about, you said we're wired differently. You ever thought about that wired and weird have all the same letters?
Obviously you have.
I'm,
You just went there.
I'm, I'm wired, you're weird.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I represent that remark. So, I think that,
Wait for it. All right.
woohoo!
First
Thank you,
Diet
Diet Coke, the unofficial
Coke. That's right.
sponsor of our podcast.
We don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah, no kidding. Even in that, one of the things that I have to be careful, because I'm a conflict avoider.
Mm-hmm.
So if the emotional side of the conversation gets strong, I have a tendency to shut down. And sometimes it's not because you're emotional, but because I'm feeling my emotions getting strong.
Hmm.
And I don't want my emotions to get strong because, number one, strong emotions are not something I'm comfortable with. Number two, I don't want to hurt you because I get so emotional. I don't want my emotions to move us into that violence place.
Mm.
And so conversation becomes difficult for me. Conversation sucks when I'm feeling so emotional that I want to go out of control, and that's not where I want to be, because
Mm-hmm.
I am a person who's very in control of for the most part of his emotions.
So there's two things I want to probe there. One is you said um, that you're a conflict avoider. You started there, so I'll start there. It's weird to me because I've always thought of you as a person who very effectively initiates really healthy forms of conflict. Like, for example, in when I'm using you as a sounding board,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll come up with some zinger of a question like, well, what about this? And you'll challenge something. And I know you've done it like in counseling settings where you've challenged someone with what they think or what they're perceiving. And I've never thought that that was hard for you.
It's not hard when it's not personal.
Hmm.
When it becomes personal, then it becomes emotional, and that becomes hard. So
Personal to you
it
or
may be
personal to
personal.
them?
It may be not. Well, it may become personal to them, and then they may take it out on me, and then we
Okay.
might have a little bit of a problem. Um, and I'm trying to think of like in what I think should be normal conversations with my wife may turn into more of an emotional type thing because it's because I'm so close to the situation, or if it's something I'm very passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you might say something that just it's perfectly fine because it's in your area of opinion, but it may make me feel really uncomfortable. May make me feel, you know, and that's where I have to back up and go, okay, what are they saying? Why are they saying it? And is it really affecting me, or is it just a part of the conversation? I mean, so
Mm.
there's a conversation happening inside with somebody else,
Yeah.
and then there's a conversation in my head going.
Yeah.
And so that's like this dueling banjos thing with
Yeah. I feel like
probably not a good analogy, but
I think there's always two threads going on in your head. There's the thread of what's actually happening in the immediate moment. Like I was having this conversation with somebody the other day about um public speaking. Basically, there's the thread of me thinking about what I'm saying or about to say and how I want to say it, and reading the crowd and making connection with the crowd. There's that thread that's in the public speaking, and then there's the thread that is evaluating myself as I'm doing. Like, oh, that, I didn't say that very well, or why is that person falling asleep, or you know um oh, I need to get grapes at the grocery store. What? But there's always another thread going on that is most of the time evaluative. Like it's me assessing that. So yeah, there's always that the dueling banjos in your head. Um, the other thing I wanted to dig into is not necessarily yet in this podcast, but you have said in the past that you feel like you're expected to be passionate. Do you mean like in every conversation you're expected always to have some passionate opinion about everything? Or did I read that wrong?
I think that there are times when um, the person I'm having the discussion with is passionate and expecting that same kind of passionate to come back.
Mm.
And that's not in my normal, and that's a good or a bad because
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes if it's a passionate thing, my ability to stay calm in the situation brings the conversation back down to a reasonable level that we both can have the conversation.
Gotcha.
But when you meet somebody who has a very passionate style of conversation, they expect you to step into that. And when you don't step into that, that becomes frustrating for them because you're not fighting as hard as they are.
Yeah. Do you feel like most of the time do those people expect you to be passionate in agreement with them or in disagreement, or is it just random?
I think it's just random. I think it depends on the personality and honestly what the subject is. Um, because if you're talking about a passionate subject, which is typically political,
Mm-hmm.
um, could be religious.
Yeah.
Um,
Political or theological, one of the two.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, there is the passionate. I want you to be passionate about being a Democrat or being a Republican, so I can be just as passionate about my side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're dispassionate about that, then I'm out of the conversation.
Do you think the expectation is higher on, for example, you and I, because we're pastors, that people expect us to be passionate about the same things they are? I sometimes feel, I'll just say it, I sometimes feel that way. Like people come to me, for example, with their political convictions, that are tied to their religious values, and they want me to be just as passionate about what they're passionate about when I may have political things that I'm passionate about, but it may not align with what they're passionate about. And sometimes I get people who are like, well, why don't you care about that? Or why don't you campaign for this? Or why don't you advocate for this? Or why don't you talk about this more?
See, and I think that's where it becomes, it's why don't you? It's almost like
Mm-hmm.
this attack of there's something wrong with you in that kind of conversation. And that's the kind that I go, wait a minute. This isn't about me. This isn't about why I believe. What you're asking me is why don't I agree with you?
And why don't I think and act exactly the same as you?
Right.
Right.
Exactly. And so, you know, I am probably more um if I were to even look at my political beliefs or even maybe even some of my religious beliefs, my theological look at it, I'm probably much more centrist than I am passionate one side or passionately
Mm,
on the other side. So it's interesting because we're in a political season. We're getting
right.
ready. We're number one, we're coming into the midterms, but we're going to be going into the presidential. And um, I really look at the candidates, and part of the two parts that I look at are, you know, what have you done, or what are you planning to do if you're
Mm-hmm.
if you're a relatively unknown? What are you planning to do? But number two, especially in this climate, is are you a bully?
Mm,
Are you? I mean, political discourse has always been passionate, but it seems to me that we run so much more into name calling and what you've done wrong instead of here's how I would fix things. Here's where I'm going. Here's why I believe this is the right path.
yeah, policy or substance
Yeah.
conversations. Yeah.
So um, now the flip side of that, I had a conversation in my head last night because my wife and I were voting. And but what I really liked about it was that in the book that they give us is they give us, and this was primarily in the amendments, but they give us the amendment and then they give us the pros and the cons. And so I read the amendment and I go, okay, I think this is why I support this amendment. So, but let me go to look at the opposite
Mm-hmm.
opinion because I want to know what is it, why is it that you're against it? Or why
Right.
are you for it? What is it that is causing you to go that way? And those are the conversations I like to have with people is somebody states an opinion and I want to know, how did you arrive there?
Mm.
What is it? Not that I agree with you, but I'm just curious.
What's the process?
Yeah,
What's
what
the
is the process that you got there? Because for me, that gives me insight not only to how you got there, but who you are. Where did that
mm.
come from?
I'm not sure if you had a conversation in your head that qualifies as a conversation.
You've never been in my head.
That's just thinking. I think most people would say, I was thinking the other day. No, I had a conversation in my head.
Well, but have you ever not been, well, if I go this way, I can do this, but if I go this way,
Yeah, that's just thinking.
no, that's a conversation.
My
Because
wife might agree with you.
part of that would be like, oh, don't be an idiot, go the other
Because
way, or
I
whatever.
frequently have conversations with my wife that I did not participate in because they all happened in her head. And
Then she's mad at you and you're trying to figure out why.
yeah, because she's already pre-assigned what the outcome of this conversation is based on all the times she's had it before. I'm probably going to get in trouble for putting that on a podcast.
Won't be our first time.
So back to actual people to people conversations.
Get out of your head, Scott.
There are conversations I want to have, but I'm often afraid to start. And it has to do often with my preconceived notions of their preconceived notions of me.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe just because of, because I'm a pastor or because I'm a follower of Jesus or, whatever, because of my age, because of my whatever. I always think people have these preconceived notions or it's my preconceived notions of their preconceived notions of me or my preconceived notions.
to put that in a nutshell, because you just went all over the place.
Right.
It's the idea that I know what I think of me. I don't know what you think of me,
Yes, that's a much better way to say it.
but I know what I think you think of me.
Okay, now you just went down the rabbit hole again.
No, because I don't know what you think of me,
Right.
but by your actions and things, I'm
Hmm.
making judgments of what I think you think of me.
And I don't want to go back to junior high and be like, "Do you like me, Mark? Yes or no?" Um, and so there's conversations that I would love to start with people. I'm really fascinated, but there's always that little bit of fear, and it's a fear that I attempt to overcome. It's not a fear that prevents me from starting them, but it definitely like it's heart thumping in your chest kind of as you want to start a conversation. And often for me those are conversations about faith with people that are in my life that I don't know where they're at.
Yeah.
And I love to know where they're at, and unashamedly I'd love the chance to share with them about Jesus, and I would hope that they would see uh what Jesus is offering them and want that for themselves. But at the same time, that's not a condition of my friendship. It's just it's a it's a space in life I'm really interested in and passionate in. That is a conversation I'm passionate about, but not in the sense of demanding that they agree with me, but just wanting to engage in the conversation. So,
See, and I don't see that in you, and that's the difference between what's going on inside and outside. Because I watch you in conversations, and I'm not blowing smoke here. I think you are thoughtful, and I think you're brilliant in how you put your words together that make people feel comfortable
hmm,
to have that conversation. And inside might be the anticipation of where is this going to go. I mean, I've seen you at times when, more so when you're going into counseling situations and need to have a difficult conversation.
hmm,
I've seen that nervousness, but then it seems like by the time we get to the point of, okay, I'm ready to go in, there is this peace that settles over you that kind of goes, okay, I know I have a game plan. And so,
yeah,
and maybe that's the part that happens, but I've seen you step into conversations and I'm just going, brilliant. I wish I would have thought of that. I mean, because you do that so well that I don't think most people would say, "Oh, Tom has a horrible time getting into conversations." Me, on the other hand, I feel like I walk in a party, I might as well stand in the corner because I don't know what to say.
Oh, I do stand in the corner at a party. I went to a birthday party the other day for a staff member at our church, and it was in probably like a 40 by 50 foot room. It was a big meeting space.
Hmm.
Um, there was probably 50, I don't know, 30 or 40 people in the room, kids playing and adults standing around and chatting. And I came in and I immediately saw my son sitting on a couch. So I zoomed over and sat next to him and hung out with him for a little bit. And then I got up to get some food, and then I literally saw a friend that was over playing with his kid kind of in the corner of the room. And I went down and I sat by him and said, I'm just going to hang out with you while I eat my hot dog. And I literally sat in the corner of the room. And for me, it's interesting. There's an insecurity in me when it comes to social settings that I don't have when I have a very defined role. Like when I'm the counselor, and you're right, like I'm unsettled if I know I need to confront somebody in counseling. I'm unsettled until I have a strategy. But once I know how I want to approach it, then I'm fine. And I'll say, okay, here's what I need to, here's what we're going to talk about today, and I know how I'm going to get into that, and I'm comfortable because I have an expected role, and I kind of feel at least that they're expecting me to lead the conversation, and so if I do, I'm not
Prepared.
well, yeah, well, and I'm not blowing their expectations out. They're
Right.
expecting that from me. So, but in a social setting, like in particular, the people that I often interact with the most that I don't really know where I stand are people in the soccer world. I coach at the high school, and so I meet coaches, I meet parents, I meet players, I meet other school people, and often am curious about where they're at. Um, are they Christian? Are they Catholic? Are they atheist? Are they something else? And I'm curious to know. I'm curious to build a relationship. Curious, if there's an openness to hear about Jesus. I mean, those are the conversations that, like, oh, they're so hard for me to initiate because I feel like, um, actually, I feel like because I'm a pastor, there's all these expectations on their end that I'm gonna be pushy or dogmatic or whatever, when really I'm really more interested in a conversation than in a like giving them a sermon.
Well, and again, it comes back to it's what I think you think of me, not what
Mm-hmm.
you actually think of me. And so we
Mm-hmm.
we get stuck in that trap. And I think for me, and I read an article several months ago, that maybe even years now, that talked about that public speakers generally are very good in the public arena because they don't have to deal with the conversation. They don't have to. So we're comfortable on stage. We're
Right.
comfortable having the conversation because it's somewhat one-sided. It's somewhat just us having the conversation. But then we are very uncomfortable in the intimate one-to-one, one-to-two conversations. And more times than not, I will get into a conversation and I will run out of things to say. And it's like, okay, I'm out.
Yeah.
I got to go check my mic, or I got to go do this, or I got to go do that, because I don't know where to go next.
Mm-hmm.
And what's weird about it is that there are times I find myself really easily getting into a conversation. And let me give you an example. I was at lunch with a buddy of mine, and um, the waitress came up, and wasn't a busy time, so there wasn't a lot of, I mean, because I always worry about waitresses and how much time they have and that kind
Yeah.
of thing. But and this
They're
this
thoughtful like
this
that.
young lady, I know, this young lady came up and she said, she was taking our uh, our order, and she said, "My name is," and it was just this very unique name.
Mm.
And I said, "Where does that come from?" And she said, "Well, my dad was very spiritual, really believed in the Bible, and this is one of Job's daughters. This was the name of one of Job's daughters." And I said, "Wow, that's fascinating." I said, "Did that spirituality kind of carry over into your life, or have you kind of walked down a different road? Kind of tell me where that led." And so I began this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
felt very natural to me.
Mm.
But you put me in a different environment and I'm like, "Oh no, we're not having that conversation. We're not going there." So that was, and I don't know why. I can't explain why, unless it was just because the atmosphere was comfortable enough and I felt a trust level from her
Mm.
that I could ask that question. Or my first question came out in such a way that she felt like she could trust me.
Yeah.
And that might have been part of it, that there was an instant, okay, we can trust each other because we're not going to.
It's interesting how sometimes you can assess that trust so quickly, and sometimes I mean, you might know somebody for months and still have no sense of where that trust level is.
Well, and my desire, honestly, in my spiritual life is to have more conversations like that, to
Mm.
be able to step, to not have conversations suck, but to have conversations that are life-giving and productive and
Interesting.
challenge and
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
and challenging.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm still stuck in my head when you said, it's common for public speakers to struggle in private conversations. I'm like, I'm such a cliche. Oh, I almost made coffee come out your nose. Awesome.
No, you're just another statistic.
Mm-hmm. So where do you want to go from here?
I if somebody was to ask you, if somebody was to come up to you and say, "Tom, how do I approach difficult conversations? How do I step into that?" How would you counsel that person? How would you give them advice in that area?
Uh, Start by saying you ask for permission. I think that's important. I did this with my brother. One of the hardest conversations I've ever initiated, and I knew it would be hard, but it was actually, and it was also so incredibly productive that I learned a lot from the experience. So I've mentioned it before in the church context, but my brother and I grew up in the same very traditional Christian family. And then when he went to college, he kind of he essentially kind of chose a different path as far as faith issues go. And I, of course, chose a path that led me to be a pastor in that same traditional Christian vein. And so we went down very different paths. We've always been we weren't super close as brothers. I was the annoying little brother. And so it wasn't until like I was out of high school that we began to kind of interact in more friendly ways, like as both as adults. And but it became this thing over the years. My mom, of course, always praying for my brother, and always inviting him to Easter and to Christmas, and always hoping to get him to come back to the faith that he grew up in, to the point where he I mean, I could tell by his reactions, look on his face, or by how he might respond, that he was feeling pressure, and it was not a comfortable conversation between he and my mom. And it always bothered me that there was this wall there, and this is something that's such a huge part of my life, and I literally had no idea what he believed anymore, because it was this topic you didn't talk about, because it felt like mom made it uncomfortable. But and that's in her enthusiasm to want to kind of like pull her son back in. So I'll never forget, it was 1999, December 31st, the change of the millennium. And he and I was up visiting him up in Oregon, and he and I went for a walk, and with his dog down a river up in Central Oregon. And I knew I wanted to have the conversation, and so I basically kind of prefaced it with again, I had my strategy in mind. I don't know that that made me super comfortable, but at least I had a strategy in mind. And I said, you know, I've always thought, not all, yeah, but for a long time I've thought that it's sad to me that faith is obviously a big part of my life, and clearly you're not pursuing the same faith that we grew up in, but I actually have no idea where you're at, and I feel like mom always trying to bring you back has created this wall of like discomfort, and I just don't want that between us. Like I'm never going to try to strong arm you or force you into a conversation, but I would actually really love to know what you believe and where you're at. And is that something you'd be willing to talk about? And so I asked, I kind of gave the preface, but I also asked for permission to engage in the conversation. And that permission is when it's such a gentle way to enter a conversation, and it gives such it's respectful, I think, to the person that you're asking, and most people respond. Most people that have asked for permission, they're actually honored that you asked for permission to enter a difficult conversation, and generally the response is yes. And even the no's that I've got, it's usually like, I'm not in the right headspace for that conversation right now, but yeah, let's do it another time. So I find that asking permission is a huge way to get there. That's the first thing.
Just a dovetail of it, because as you were talking, I was thinking about that again, going back to my conversation with that young woman, and I remember starting it off with, "Hey, do you mind if I ask you a question?"
Mm-hmm.
And that was that permission question. That
Mm-hmm.
was that, and she could have said, "No, I don't have time right now," or
Mm-hmm.
most people are going to say yes only because it's polite.
Yeah, or out of curiosity of
or
what
out of
question you want to
curiosity,
ask.
right? There's always like that, yeah,
Where's
like,
this
where's this
going?
going?
Yeah.
But it's the crack in the door to be able to say, yeah, I want to hear the question, then I'll decide whether we go into a conversation about it.
So the first thing for me is asking for permission. And then there's three things that I'm kind of watching in how I approach the conversation. Um, and I say like I have this all locked down. This is largely off the cuff.
So
But
you aren't saying these are the three absolute things
yeah, they're
for a
not the
good
three.
conversation?
They're not the only three things. They're the three things that come to my mind.
Okay.
And they're significant. But safety, humility, and value. And I want to start probably not in that order, but humility. I think it's important if it's a difficult conversation to come into the conversation with the humility of either I'm like I want to make sure if it's a confrontation of some kind, like somebody hurt your feelings or you did something that you think was wrong and you felt like you were in a position where you needed to address it, the humility of saying, did I read the situation right? Like I'm not going to walk into the conversation. Do I have your permission to ask you a question? Like, yeah. Why did you murder that person? You know, like that then all of a sudden there's no
That
humility
would
in
be a
that. Like,
difficult confrontation, yeah.
it's a so to me the humility is that kind of, and I guess humility and gentleness, in my mind kind of go together. Like, this is what I saw, this is how I read the situation. Is there something I'm missing? And for me, like with my brother, the humility was excuse me, sorry. For me, with my brother, the humility was, I understand this is a tension between you and mom. I don't want to have that tension. So can we have this conversation in a different way? And the humility was, I don't want to tell you what I think you should believe. I want to hear what you say about your beliefs. Okay, we're likely to be a little loopy here. Because not only did our batteries die in the middle of the recording, and so we went and got new batteries and restarted and have been talking for the last 10 minutes, but we forgot to press record when we restarted. And so we're going to rehash all of what we said because that's awesome. All right. Do that away from the mic. All right. So
I thought we wanted the sound of the Diet Coke because they're the unofficial sponsors. So too loud, sorry.
All right. So going back, I think we were talking about humility.
Yes.
We were talking about humility, and in my mind, there's I guess another quality of gentleness that goes with humility. But when I want to engage in a difficult conversation, after asking for permission, humility is this assumption on my part that I don't know all the facts. I might have my perception of all the facts, but going into a conversation, particularly like something that's confrontive, like I saw somebody do something and it bothered me, or I felt like I needed to say something, rather than saying, hey, ask for permission. Can I ask you a question? Yeah, sure. Why did you murder that person? I rather than going there, saying, I observed you holding a bloody knife after, and somebody lying on the floor. What happened? And giving a chance to hear their perspective. There's a humility in that, and that's of course a ridiculous example, but
that is a ridiculous example.
But like with my brother, the humility was that I wanted to hear his, like, what I believe. I'd love to hear what you believe.
Right.
And I think there's when you're humble and you're inquisitive, and I guess inquisitive is another thing that I didn't necessarily list, but there's humility and inquisitiveness and safety and value and gentleness is another one. But these are all things that I think as they play into these difficult conversations, they they're super helpful of setting up this space where people feel free to engage. Um, so in humility, just not assuming that I have all the information, or that my way of interpreting the information I have is the only way, and being willing to listen is a huge part of humility. I think that creates that safe space that gives people a little bit more comfort in getting engaged in the conversation. Um, and when people don't feel safe, they get defensive, and they either it's fight or flight, conversational fight or flight. They're gonna if they don't feel safe, like you're going to attack them, then they might just attack you first to get it over with, or they might avoid really getting into the conversation. So making it feel safe, like I'm not attacking you, I'm just really interested to hear what you have to say. And I guess all of that, these things all kind of, I think, dovetail together, but making sure that they feel valued. Like I'm not just waiting for them to stop speaking so I can say what I want to say, but that I am actually listening to what they have and valuing what they say, even if I disagree with it. It happened in my brother's my conversation with my brother, in that um, he the end of the conversation was, he said, I actually think your faith. I'm really glad you have your faith. I and he celebrated that. I was actually a little surprised, and he said, I think it's great. I think spiritual things are real, and I think that you have that in your life is a great thing. I just think your perspective of faith is too narrow. And after we had all this conversation, I said, I can understand why you would think that, but I'm glad that you don't just resent my faith because it's not yours. And I said, and I'm actually glad that you have all these things that to you, like that you're open to spiritual realities and all of that, and that you're not a closed book. I guess from my point of view, believing so strongly in Jesus, I just feel like the path you're on just isn't complete. And he understood that and wasn't offended by it. And so it was a great opportunity to strengthen our relationship and to not have this wall between us. And we've had subsequent conversations about faith that weren't, difficult the way they used to be. And so, um, but I think he felt valued, I felt valued, that made the conversation work. And that's huge. So, and I don't think I talked much about inquisitiveness, but I just think leaning into questions more than statements makes conversation more safe, makes it more, frankly, more interesting. Being inquisitive about what people believe makes them feel more valued, or, being inquisitive about other people's perspective of what happened or what's going on makes them feel valued. That makes them feel safe. That's a that's what allows those conversations to happen that are often difficult to get into.
Yeah. In the non-recording recording time that we were doing, you used the word curiosity. And I think, inquisitive makes me feel like you're saying, it's like an inquisition. I'm gonna
Oh,
ask you.
yeah,
Curiosity
that's
is
not what I
like,
mean.
and I know that's not what you mean, but
Right.
that when you use that word curiosity, it really struck a chord with me, because that's that, hey, I want to know about you. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna lead with questions, going back to your idea that I'm going to lead with questions that are going to make us feel safe, that are going to get permission, that come across as, I don't know everything. I'm not a know it all. And ask my wife, I already think I know everything. But um, asking those questions almost comes across like, I don't know it all. So let me see what you think about this,
Right.
and values that person. And oftentimes for me, it's kind of like, I want to lead with questions and I want to leave with questions.
Hmm.
In the idea that not only are they leaving questions about our conversation, but even I might be leaving with, oh, I had not thought about that. I need to look more into it. Or,
Mm-hmm.
and so and I loved what you said, that we've had subsequent conversations from that.
They were
That's when a
far
conversation,
easier to get into.
well, yeah,
Yeah.
but then also it wasn't just the one conversation. It was, oh, we need to talk more. It's almost like the intimacy became
Hmm.
closer because of humility and safety and value, and permission.
Right.
It was, okay, now I know I can go into another conversation with this person and feel those same things. And so I'm much more comfortable about it. And when one of those are broken is when the conversation stops. When I no longer feel safe, or I no longer feel like you are making the conversation safe, the conversation will quit. Or if I feel like you are coming across aggressive, or that your point is the only point,
Hmm.
and it's the only right point, and you're wrong for not having my point or agreeing with my point, the conversation stops.
Right.
And so, just as important as it is to step into conversations with permission, safety, humility, and value, it's important we don't break those values in the midst of conversation.
Right. And I don't remember if this was part of our now re-recorded conversation or not, but the value part goes, that's a theological underpinning. Like, I believe firmly that people are made in the image of God, that all of us image bearers of God. And so um, it's not just that I need to treat them as if they have value, but I don't value them. I need to value them because they are image bearers of God, and I need to demonstrate that I respect and value them as an image bearer of God, and there's something to see in them. There's there's nuggets, reflections of the qualities, the values and the qualities of our Creator in each of us, and being willing to be curious enough to find that in someone is very honoring to them, very respectful to them, and makes conversation uh, interesting, engaging, and very safe. So, um, yeah, that's a huge part. Like, this isn't just how to manipulate people. This is how do we treat people with the the value that God placed in them.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the important part, is to be able to look at them and go, I value you because you are created in God's image.
Hmm.
And that's more important to me than what you're passionate about or thinking about, because I want to know. I look at you and go, you were created just like I was. And I want to know why you think the way you do, whether it's
Hmm.
wired or weird. I want to know where that comes from.
Oh, I have a great segue to the conclusion. This is because this goes right into resisting pretense. Like, there are a lot of Christian people who don't feel like there's anything to learn from anything outside of the Christian space. And frankly, I think there's a lot we can learn from anyone. And it's pretentious to think we have the monopoly on valuable information. There's something to be learned even from people that aren't in our faith, because they're still image bearers of God, even if they're not, they're not in relationship with God at the moment. There's still something there that they're reflecting, that's important to them, that we can learn from. And sometimes we get blind by our own, habits and traditions and ways of looking at things. And so I just think it resists that pretense of feeling like we have all the answers when we don't always have all the answers. That if we're in that curiosity space, we'll be far more, um we'll learn more,
Mm-hmm.
and that's valuable. And I think as we engage with people and having difficult conversations, particularly conversations about faith, when we come at it from that respectful, safe, humble, gentle place, we'll find more engagement because they'll feel that sense of value.
Right.
All right. Well, that's it for today. We hope that it's been sharpening your thinking. We hope that it inspires you to have faith-infused conversations. We'll be back again for another installment of Resisting Pretense that hopefully doesn't involve 3 different interruptions to our recording process.
Sounds good.
All right.
Bye.